Let's talk solo guitar. I put up a couple of posts recently. I've been working on some stuff with a couple of private students who are currently working specifically on solo guitar. One in particular, I won't call anybody out, I don't want to put anybody in the spotlight, but one guy in particular who's already sounds great and already has some really nice chord melody arrangements, but he wants to start doing more solo guitar performance. And if you've ever done solo guitar gigs, you know that it's cool to have chord melody arrangements, but then you still have to keep playing when the arrangement's done. My first gig after I graduated college, undergrad, like 20 years ago, was a weekly 4-hour solo guitar gig. Yes, you read that right. 4-hour solo guitar gig. I thought I knew music halfway decently at that point. I already had my degree. I'd already been gigging with groups, and then I landed this gig. I needed the money, so I took it. 4 hours. It looks like there's 2 people on here, but it also looks like my stream keeps cutting out. So chime in. Somebody comment below and let me know if I'm still here. Now it's showing me again. Hopefully this is working. Worst case, it's not working. Anyways, I want to get into talking solo guitar. What I learned on that gig is that you can have all the intellectual knowledge you want. You can have a music degree, you can know your theory, you can have some cool arrangements, you can have everything you want to have, but if you don't have at least a little bit of freedom to actually play music. Phil, thank you. I just have a black square with a winding circle at the moment. Messing with my head. Good to see you. Thanks for chiming in. If we don't have a little bit of facility in just an improvisational way, we can have great arrangements, and that's super fun. You got like your Joe Pass chord melody licks down, and you memorize a few standards, stuff like that. Like, it's great, but we really want to be able to develop something not necessarily virtuosic, but just where we're in command of the language. So what I want to do today is just briefly go over a couple of simple tricks that we can all implement relatively quickly. What do I mean by relatively quickly? I don't mean that you can just kind of snap your fingers and immediately it's going to start, but here's what I mean. I posted the same topics that I've been discussing here in our group in a couple of other groups that I thought people would dig, some like solo jazz guitar Facebook groups, including a screenshot of a transcription of Bud Powell, one of the killingest cats ever, a transcription showing him using this exact technique that we're going to discuss today that I've been talking about recently, and just kind of bring it up and say, hey, I've been working on this thing with one of my students and I heard Bud Powell doing it. Here's this transcription showing his left hand, right hand, kind of having a conversation. Who else works on it? What do you guys think? And a bunch of people were really into it, but sadly, unshocking number of people were just like hating on it, hardcore hating. Music teachers, college teachers, Berkeley people. And it was a lot of like, oh, that's silly. Oh, that's jazz guitar 101. That's chord melody 101. Which my feeling is, and alongside that, it was sort of like, once you should already be able to do that, then you need to be able to do the next thing, then the next thing, then the next thing. You need this technique, you need that technique, you need this, you need that, like all this stuff, just paragraph after paragraph of like the whole breakdown. And the whole time I'm reading it, I don't necessarily disagree with anything. There are other more advanced techniques we can use, but the whole time I'm just thinking, Bud Powell sounds so fucking good. And the whole solo, chorus after chorus after chorus, is just this simple little technique. What one of the Berkeley guys pointed out as being like, semester 1 concept. And all I'm thinking is, why are we so worried about everything that's supposed to happen for the next 5 to 10 to 20 years after that first semester, if that's what Bud Powell's using? Like, if Bud Powell can take that thing and make it sing and make it sound incredible, it's probably worth us focusing on it. For those of you who are new to the group, who I haven't met yet, my name is Jordan. Welcome. I moved back to New York like 12 years ago to study with Schofield and Peter Bernstein, a bunch of my heroes. Taught at NYU at their jazz studies program, got diagnosed with brain disease, lost the ability to play about 8 years ago, had to relearn, and decided to go through it a slightly different way. And I'm going to share some of those ways in this video. Specifically, I'm going to talk about some stuff from Peter Bernstein. We're going to apply Peter Bernstein's comping mindset to solo guitar, as well as some pianistic stuff I learned from Stefan Harris. The first thing that we all have to be on the same page about, though, is this concept of the imaginary piano player. It's coming from the standpoint of a post-bop, Bill Evans style piano player, translating the way he uses his two hands onto the fretboard. This is something I learned from Stefan Harris, incredible vibraphonist. He had me sitting at the piano and playing these really deceptively complicated sounds. Like, he had me doing it with a triad and a shell voicing, which are two of the simplest structures we have in music, but when you put them together in the right way, it unlocks these wild illusions, these sonic illusions. It was very frustrating. I decided I had to figure out a way to translate it onto the guitar, and then shortly after that was when I got sick, had to relearn how to play, and basically developed a whole system around this pianistic approach, which is why I was so happy to see Bud Powell, not post-bop, right, like more straight ahead bebop, but using kind of the same stuff that Bill Evans was doing, just in a slightly different format. So we're going to start here. We're going to simplify everything down, okay? In my personal opinion, as someone who's taught at multiple jazz studies programs in New York City, multiple universities, and who's had to learn twice now, most of what we need, like 90 to 97% of what we need, all shows up in the first chapter of the theory book. Like, everything else is great. We can learn all this intellectual stuff we want, but step one, in my opinion, should be to actually learn how to use the stuff to make music, not just to play arpeggios and stuff on the fretboard. How do you actually turn that into music? Should be step one, because it can happen relatively quickly. Sort of like I was talking about with the Berkeley guy, kind of calling out that technique as being sort of too simplistic to be useful, and yet Bud Powell built his entire solo on it. Zach, what's happening, my man? So, what's the best way to get started? We'll just talk about like Stella. I'm a big advocate of simplifying everything we're doing. Like, don't try and eat the whole elephant, right? Like, one bite at a time. So let's just talk about the first couple measures. Here's what we're going to do. Left hand, right hand. No chord melody. Yes, this is solo guitar. We're not going to do chord melody. I refer to what I'm about to show and what Bud Powell was doing in that video, in the track that I linked the video to. I call it melody chord, right? Because it sounds really familiar. It's the same thing. We're just prioritizing the melody and then filling in chords where they're possible, as opposed to trying to play every melody note as a harmonized voicing, which is a good thing to be able to do, to start working on. But it takes a really long time to get any sense of freedom from that. So, melody chord. Like, that's the opening motif to Stella. It's so simple, so timeless. 2 notes. Step one, in my opinion, you should just be able to play the melody. I've actually seen a lot of people, myself back in the day included, who learned a tune as a chord melody, and then we found ourselves in an ensemble and we couldn't just play the melody. So step one, make sure you can play the melody. Now, let's dumb down the melody. We're going to simplify it down, okay? Anything you want music, you have to practice it the opposite of what you expect. If you want to play faster, you need to play slower. You need to practice slower. If you want to play more intricate and sophisticated sounding solo guitar, you need to practice things in more restrained ways. So we're going to kind of steel frame this melody. Right, can you guys hear how that's kind of the melody? It's not. I'm just simplifying that phrase down to. Why? Because it leaves way more space. It's using less fingers, it's taking up less of the measure, there's more room in our mind and in the sound. The second thing we're going to do is we're going to simplify down the harmony, and this is going to bring us into some of the Peter Bernstein stuff. When I hung with Pete, we talked mostly about comping, and everything was about movement. It was always like, stop playing the rowbook changes, stop sitting on a chord for 4 beats or 8 beats, and just move. Like, pick up the harmony and carry it into the next measure. He didn't really have a whole lot of teaching devices or techniques to help do that, except to just constantly ask for it over and over and over. I stumbled upon time-tested techniques later when I was working with a great big band, a couple of great big band composers and arrangers, and I realized, like, oh, there are orchestration devices that people have been using from Bach all the way up to Duke Ellington to Kurt Rosenwinkel that are accomplishing what Peter's talking about. If you're in the program with me and you're studying with me, you know that those are dominant, diminished, chromatic, diatonic. That's the order I practice them in. That's the order I recommend everybody else learn them in, which is very backwards from what most people talk about. Diatonic is the last one on the list for me. It takes the most practice and is actually used kind of the least in my opinion. Dominant, very easy. Diminished, a little bit trickier, but they look the same in every key. We're going to find the steel frame beams of the harmony, and then we're going to have the steel frame beams of the right-hand melody, this pianistic view, Bud Powell, Bill Evans, like the basic melody and the basic milestones of the chord progression. We're not worried about the whole chord progression right now. We want as much empty space as possible so that we can fill it in and start ornamenting these ideas with more intricate lines, with voice leading harmonies, with alternate harmonic pathways. But we have to open things up. We have to let them breathe if we want to stand a shot at actually gaining control over the form outside of and beyond an arranged chord melody. So if you play the opening 2 measures in Stella as the E half diminished to A7, the 2-5, which is the real book version, I would recommend for you that you just focus on the A7, okay? Just do a shell voicing for now, okay? This is like an A7 sharp 9 variation of a shell voicing. Root, 3rd, flat 7, sharp 9. If you play, quote unquote, the real changes, let's say the classic original changes, just play like B flat diminished, okay? If you know any basic dominant diminished harmony, you know that these are the same. Like, they're not, but they are. B flat diminished or A7 sharp 9. Okay, both work. Thanks, Zach. We'll see if we can make it even crunchier before we call it. Except I gotta speed up because I don't have a lot of time, and I want to get through kind of a bunch more stuff. We might have to do this in a couple of rounds, maybe a follow-up next week. Right? The next chord progression is C minor F7. Don't worry about all that. Just dumb it down. Like, we have to give our ears, our mind, our souls, our fingers, we got to get everybody a chance to just breathe a little bit if you want to find freedom as quickly as possible. You can find musical freedom by just transcribing Joe Pass for 20 years and gigging a bunch. You can find it by going and dropping 200 grand at Berkeley. Like, okay, you can do that. Because I had to relearn how to play music, I realized, having had the wisdom from my mentors and seeing what they prioritized and worked on, that I wasn't really so interested with that stuff the second time around. I just wanted to get back to the music. What was Bud Powell doing? I frankly don't care that somebody at Berkeley says, oh, well, what Bud Powell's doing is just silly little chord melody 101. Great, cool. Then that's what I want to do. Like, I want to do the easiest thing that gives the biggest payoff. And if Bud Powell's using it, that's the biggest payoff. So yeah, it's C minor F7. Okay, dumb it down. It's just F7. That's it. We don't need to worry about anything else at this point. We're going to ornament it. We're going to add in all those Peter Bernstein movements, but just F7. Okay, it's going to sound silly at the moment, but we can start ornamenting it with voicings, with movement. Right, that's an F7 voicing. We're not worried about that yet. Baby steps. We just gotta, if you want to build a skyscraper, you gotta get into the dirt and dig a big hole. This is just digging a big hole. Then we're going to fill it with concrete and steel, and then we can put a steel frame up and glass and flooring and furniture and like turn it into a building. Just silly little F7. B flat 7. Don't worry about the 2 chord. It's not F minor, B flat 7. It is, but for right now, for the skeleton, the steel frame, just B flat 7. That was just E flat 6 and A flat 7, but because the melody dropped down to the 3rd string, I just dropped the note from each shell voicing from the 3rd string. So they're like dyad shell voicings. You'll hear this in a lot of Monk. You'll hear this in Bud Powell. In fact, the transcription that I shared in the group recently, he played this exact voicing for G7 over There Will Never Be Another You. He played, this was his 2-5 in his left hand. He played D for the root note of D F diminished and root flat 7 for G7. And we're all out here spending 10 years trying to memorize every advanced, crazy, reharm, insane drop voicing of every invert, and Bud Powell's playing. Okay. Doesn't mean he's not using advanced stuff also, but he's able to make music with the stupid stuff. The stupid stuff is the quickest to learn and sounds amazing. Okay. Once we learn how to use it. So what was his voicing for the E flat? It was, I think it was, instead of root 3rd 6th, it was 5th 3rd 6th. That was Bud Powell's left hand. Shell voicing, inversion of a shell voicing, root note, G7. Another thing I was thinking about with that Bud Powell transcription, everyone's always harping on how you can't play a root note. Like if you're playing with a bass player, you got to get rid of the root note. And Bud Powell just comes along and he's like, oh really? That's my D half diminished. He just played a D note. And that's his G7. He just played the root in the flat 7. Again, if it's good enough for Bud Powell, it's good enough for us. Back to Stella, dumbing this stuff down. Like we want as much emptiness and simplicity as possible so that we can build, right? Stuff. That was actually just straight ahead chord melody, right? I just took every note from the melody, harmonized it. But very difficult to develop a sense of actual improvisational freedom doing that, because you have to pretty much know how to harmonize every note in real time, be able to improvise phrases and harmonize those phrases all in real time, versus doing what Bud was doing. That's just line, chord, line. I was doing sometimes 2 or 3 chords in my left hand. What I just played, I actually didn't mean to yet, but what I just played is sort of the next 1 or 2 steps of what we would do with this steel frame. We're just creating a shell using the imaginary piano player concept, simple melodic fragment, like taking the melody. Don't worry about, I mean, we can do the academic stuff and the 2-5-1s, whatever. That stuff is cool, but like, let's just go with music. Stella's a great melody. Why is it great? Because it's timeless, everybody loves it, but listen how stupid simple it is. There's so much empty space in it, right? It's very compelling because it gives us so much room to get inside of it and tinker with it. Simplified version of the melody, simplified version of the harmony. Okay? The chords, again, you can pick A7 or B flat diminished. Okay. There's a bunch of different chords we could use there, but that's what those are the 2 I would recommend for your steel frame of the harmony. Straight to F7. Does A7 resolve to F7? No. We're going to force it to resolve when we start bringing in some of the Peter Bernstein comping concepts in a second. F7 body, B flat 7. E flat 6 to A flat 7. Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm already goofing around with some cruncher voicings and some motion. What I just did there, still very simple, but now I gave it a little bit of a groove. Okay, I don't care how cool your voicings are. I don't care how great your lines are. I don't care how much interesting chord motion you have in there. None of that matters if there's not a strong swing groove. That has to be there. If you're still struggling with that, hit me up. We can talk about it. I have drumming practices and different ways that I work on it beyond just putting the motion on 1, 2, and 4, but that's not what this lesson is about. But at this stage, that's what we need to start doing. And you'll notice, like, it already now sounds like the tune. I could pull that out at a gig. It's not going to turn any heads necessarily here in New York City. Peter Bernstein is not going to come out and give me a standing ovation, but it's the tune. And if I want to improvise, it's enough to get started with. Right? Like, you can actually see the path laid in front of us. Before we get into ornamenting the melody line, let's focus on the left hand. This is so lacking in jazz guitar education. No one really pointed this stuff out to me until I got to New York and started hanging with guys like Peter. He always told me to practice comping first. And his approach to comping was keep the voicing simple and focus on what I refer to as horizontal motion comping. This is not about note stacking vertically, which is great. We can chat about that if I have a second at the end of this little live lesson, but first just learn how to use motion. Chords want to move. It's not really taught outside of Barry Harris. Like, the only motion type that's taught is diatonic. Learn your 7 diatonic chords, the chord scale. But like, how often do you actually see that in a standard or hear someone putting it in place in a standard? It's important, but mainly intellectual reasons. When it comes to actual moving through a standard, how do we create motion? Dominant. Like, that's the Mac Daddy. Dominant, diminished, chromatic, diatonic. I put diatonic at the end. Dominant. Let's go with the A7 chord. Let's pretend like you guys were practicing E half diminished to A7. Okay. One of our rules for dominant motion is that we can always approach any target we want. It does not have to be a 1 chord. Any milestone in the form, we can approach it with a dominant from a half step above. Right? It's like a normal people, not melodic triders or myself, call it a tritone sub. I just call it the flat 2 dominant, because tritone sub, there's just too many branches of thought you have to go through. Well, the tritone, that means I have to jump the interval, it's a tritone away. Okay, I want to get to A7, so the E is the right dominant, and then a tritone for me is B flat. It's like, bro, it's an A chord and a B flat chord. They're 1 fret apart. Don't worry about all that thinking stuff. Like, it's good to know the theory, but you want to be here, start here, and just go down 1 fret. That's it. Doesn't matter where you want to approach, doesn't matter what key you're in, it's always, whoop, that's it. You want to get to A, just start a fret higher, and that's your flat 2 dominant. If you want to spice it up a little bit, get a little more crunchy, this one's for you, Zach, a little more monk. You can play the dominant we want on B flat and play the E7 shell at the same time. Right? Okay, what was all that? That was just basic melody, the framework of the melody, and then those crunchy dominant shell voicings, always starting on the flat 2 of the milestone that I want to hit. So if I want to play A7, I started on B flat, resolved down to A. The next chord was F7, right? So technically I flipped it, the F7's up here, and I put a B under it. You can play it down here too. B7, B flat 7. E flat major chord, and I went right to A7 to A flat 7. Could I have played it? Sure. But that's the beauty of learning to relax a little bit, take chunks of chords out of the form, and just leave the milestone moments. Once you can see the milestone moments, you can alter them however you want. What if we kind of head towards F, just keep descending? We're just taking more chords out. So that was... By simplifying down my quote-unquote imaginary piano player's right hand, it's just giving me a little bit more freedom to put all my brain power on the left hand. Like, how can I move through this form? How can I pick up the harmony and tell some kind of story with it? These are very crunchy voicings. Maybe you don't like those. Maybe you don't like dominant movement, okay? You can just use the, 2 chords are part of dominant movement. If you're in the program with me, you know that. So we can add our 2 chords back in. That was F minor, B flat, but I tagged the chromatic 2/5. So I started. It's still just simple melody phrase, chord motion. Okay. Those are just the basic dyads like Bud Powell was playing. 2-note variations on the shelf voicing. So I'm simplifying, I'm dumbing it down more and more and more and more. Oftentimes learning music, in my experience having done it twice and having taught at multiple colleges now, oftentimes like we need our theory, we need the basics learned, but that's just giving us like this big chunk of rock, and then we kind of have to be a sculptor and go in and chisel stuff out. It's not always about adding more stuff on, it's about removing things and getting them out of the way so that we can go for the sweet spot notes. And then if we want to, we can ornament all that stuff. Same thing again. Instead of E half diminished A7, I started on F minor. Sorry, getting a little bit ahead of myself. Ornamentation. Bring down the left hand to the simplest thing possible and then ornament it. If you want to ornament it by just going back to the chords you know from the rule book, that's okay. Just understand that it's like a very limited way to think about the tune and the harmony, right? Even just adding in a flat 2 dominant, like add in the regular chords, but then fill in a flat 2 dominant between everything. E7 flat 9, sharp 9? Not really. I mean, it is, but that's not at all what I'm thinking about. I'm just beep right? I'm just moving. Those are just flat 2 dominants with the 2 chords added in between. Let's switch over to diminished motion for a minute and see what opens up there. For this, let's actually use the B flat diminished. So this B flat diminished motion, for those of you who aren't studying with me, obviously most musicians that are hanging this long into a live video about this probably know enough about diminished to know that you can move them in minor thirds. It's also worth recognizing that any of those diminished inversions can resolve up a half step to a desired target, can resolve down a half step to a desired target, and can resolve to a static target, meaning if you want to resolve to E flat major, you could play E flat diminished and carry it into E flat major. So when I talk about adding in diminished motion, what I'm talking about is seeing a target chord and kind of like a great white shark swimming up towards it with these little small diminished movements. Not necessarily, you can do like that. That's okay, it's just a little bit on the nose versus what was that? That was B diminished to C minor to E diminished to F minor. So I'm like swimming from one chord to the next target chord with these little diminished resolution patterns. What was that? That was B flat 7, D diminished, E flat diminished, E flat major 7. These are just different ways of improvising harmonic motion through the form. I'm teaching my left hand to move with more freedom, okay? And I'm using the melody of Stella in its simplest version to kind of force, first of all, to give me more mental bandwidth, but also to force myself to stay inside of a form and to do something that's maybe not so academic sounding. Once we get the hang of creating some left hand motion, okay? Dominant, diminished, chromatic, diatonic. Then we can dumb down our left hand again and refocus on our right hand. We just want to work on one thing at a time. It's like not that difficult to learn one thing. It's near impossible to learn two things at the same time. For the right hand, just dumb down the chords back to the simple version. A7. B-da, B-da, bo-do-be-bom, bo-bo-dee, do-dee-bom. Right? But now just play cooler lines. As you get the hang of the skill of right hand thinking improvisation and the skill of left hand harmonic pathway improvisation, and if you're doing it in the context of always having this conversation back and forth, things start to develop. Like freedom starts to bud.